Thank you all for being here. I want to talk what's happening with Trump's indictment because the grand jury in New York has now voted to indict Trump. I want to say first, this is unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this before. It also, interestingly, establishes a new precedent. And also, I want to talk about what this really means. We will jump into some questions a bit later in the show. I want to kind of give a rundown of what's going on right now, give my take on it. And then if you folks have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll get to them in a bit. So let me start off by kind of giving my take. I made some notes I want to go over. First of all, we've never seen anything like this. Normally, presidents and former presidents have legal immunity. And there's several reasons for that. One is, well, you don't want to have it so it's legal to politically persecute, your political enemies. It makes sense with a elected system like ours where we elect our leaders. You don't want to have, especially with party politics, one party arresting the members of the other party, because that's what you see in corrupt communist countries and banana republics. They call them banana republics because it's kind of a joke. They're not real republics. They are basically socialist or communist systems masquerading as republics. Typically, it's a one-party dictatorship, and that is the reason you normally don't see this kind of thing happen. That being said, though, they don't really have a strong case against Trump. I'll explain that. The evidence is not strong, although they do claim that they have evidence they haven't shown us before, so we'll see what the heck they have. Even then, it's going to be very shaky. I'll explain why, so hear me out and stick with me. Also, interestingly, this establishes a new precedent. And honestly, for conservatives and Republicans, this may help them more than it helps the Democrats, honestly. And if you even consider, Bush era, Republican, Trump era type stuff, it could go after him too. What this does is basically removes the legal protection for former presidents. You could, now that Trump's been indicted, you could have a random DA in any city in the United States bring out charges against Barack Obama. You could have any DA in the United States bring out charges against Bill Clinton or, George Bush for that matter. And if they can go after the president, they can go after anybody. They can go after any level now, and the door is open for that. It used to be the case that was kind of off limits because, as I mentioned before, you don't want to have party-based prosecutions. You don't want to have politicized justice. You don't want to go there normally. Democrats have broken that precedent now. They've gone there, and this is where we're at. Sorry, I have to peek over my mic to see what's on the screen. Now, that being said, people are wondering if they're going to imprison Trump. I can tell you it's going to be really, really hard to put Trump in prison, or any president, any former president for that matter, for one simple reason. Legally, under law, all former presidents need to have Secret Service protection. And so if they threw Trump in prison, Trump would need to have Secret Service protection while in prison. Even then, though, it's unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this before, so we don't even know how it's going to look. Technically, though, because, again, he would need to have Secret Service protection, even if they did imprison him, I don't know how that would work in a normal prison. It could be that if hypothetically somehow they did indict him and he didn't fight it, which he's going to, I should note, and he just agreed to go to prison for, probably not that long, honestly, they'd probably try to put him under house arrest, I assume. Because, again, as a former president, he would need to have certain security in place. I don't know if any of you have been to conferences where Trump has spoken, for example, after he's left office. The security, the way you have to go through metal detectors, the level of security you need to go through to even hear him speak at a conference is very, very high. Imagine that kind of security being required at a prison, where, again, you do have a lot of fights, you do have a lot of beatings and killings and other things like that. It would be very difficult to do, and I doubt they would be able to do it. And if they did do it, it would look, frankly, very, very bad for the Democrats. My take is, again, if they were to find a way to imprison him, maybe solitary confinement. I don't think that'd be doable, honestly. especially with the nature of the charges he's up against. Normally, this is a misdemeanor. They elevated a misdemeanor to a felony, which is legally shaky in and of itself. It was already beyond the statute of limitations, which is also very legally shaky. And even then, they're mixing local state law with federal law, which is also legally shaky. This entire case has very, very little to stand on. But regardless, that being said, if you were to ask me my take on what they're doing, I would say this is probably to stop Trump from campaigning. They probably believe that if Trump is standing trial and he needs to be in front of a jury and so on, that he's just going to put things down and stop campaigning. And I assume this is, from a political standpoint, what the motivation would be to actually charge him. Because again, it's a very weak case. The laws, they had to stretch the laws a lot to make this work. It makes the Democrats look bad. Biden himself is facing a lot of flack for it. And this is going to, no matter how they play this out, it's going to look like it's politicized. It's going to look like they're involved. And frankly, it's very damaging to the United States internationally at a very sensitive time, which I'll go into later this week. When the Chinese Communist Party, for example, is trying to win over different countries, even talking about holding peace discussions with Ukraine and Russia, even, for example, getting many countries, Saudi Arabia, now Brazil and others, using the Chinese yuan in place of the US dollar. The international, let's say, political system of what the United States represented until now, unfortunately, it might be changing now, is what you call the Pax Americana. And this is the idea of America, the idea of human rights, the idea of a strong legal system and human rights and justice and fair elections. That is the model of governance that was representative of the American idea. And unfortunately, we're now losing that narrative. And many countries are criticizing America on that. The Mexican president, for example, Xi Jinping and Putin, for example. Unfortunately, the actions of, unfortunately, let's be blunt, the Biden administration and the way that these woke DAs under George Soros financing are behaving is significantly damaging the image and the nature of the United States all around the world right now. And again, this is going to have a big impact on that. Back to the point, though, of Trump campaigning. I mentioned if there's any reason they may be doing this against Trump, I'd say, again, it's to stop him from campaigning. Trump's team has announced that even if they do arrest him, he is still planning to campaign. And so this is not going to stop him, in other words. At the same time, this puts him in front of the news cycle. This makes Trump a very public, very, the focus of not just the United States, but every country in the world, probably. Everybody's going to be watching this case. No matter where you are in the world, you're going to be watching this trial. And if I can give my take on that a bit, I'll be honest with you folks, until this, I wasn't quite sure how much of a chance Trump stood for 2024 because, I was at CPAC recently. He spoke there. I know, of course, we broadcasted his campaign, his speeches and so on. Trump, honestly, he can still gather a good crowd, but you can feel that the energy was not the same as in 2016. Things had died down a little bit. And given that kind of dying down of the energy behind Trump and kind of the hoorah he had in 2016, it didn't feel like he might have the momentum to really, win as many votes as he may need to. I changed my statements now. I think after this has happened, because, and this is big, actually. In my opinion, this is actually the biggest thing we're going to be watching. I think this is going to make Trump win the election, frankly. And really if this is about politics and it's not about law, and I would say that even from a legal perspective, this is very shaky, very scummy law. I'll just be blunt. Even if we believe this is not about politics at all, this is going to help Trump politically. On a huge scale. And let me explain this. Trump's political message is a very difficult one for, let's say, Democrats or for even some people who are middle of the road to accept, even for a lot of established Republicans, a lot of whom are leaning more, or at least until now, at least, we'll see how they go, we're leaning more towards a DeSantis or somebody else, because a lot of people And I know a lot of folks here, big Trump supporters and stuff, but I talk to a lot of people. There are people who will say that they believe they want someone whose rhetoric is a little more calm. They want somebody who's not as divisive. They want somebody who kind of talks to both sides a little more. And so, I'm sure people like this. I'm sure you've talked to people like this, and that's just how it is, right? Just watching the video here. I would say this has completely changed the game. This has completely changed that. And the reason... Should we play this? What do we have playing here? We'll let this play a little bit.
Because of some old horse face story? No, I don't believe that for a second. No, I'm going to vote for President Trump. He is going to run, and nothing's going to stop him from doing that. In fact, what they're doing to him right now is only strengthening his base and also showing the people who maybe didn't believe what we've been telling you for the past how many years, since 2015, that our country is being overtaken by criminals and we need to take it back. And he is the only person who actually had the guts and enough money that he can't be bribed and he can't be bought. And he just wants a better place to raise his children and his grandchildren.
Yeah, there you go. There's one person saying that. Back to the point, though, there were a lot of people who I think were leaning more towards DeSantis. Roughly. I mean, Trump still had the lead among Republicans, let's be honest. He's still at about 60-ish% of the votes based on polling. And he'd be about 70-30 to DeSantis, given various different statistics. I would say this completely changes the game. And the reason being, what they've ironically done is validated Trump's narrative. Because Trump's narrative, for Trump supporters, his narrative was kind of just given, right? For Trump supporters, his narrative is already the reality. For people who don't support him, it seems a little extreme, or at least until now. Because Trump's narrative is basically that the government is corrupt. I'm going to tell you what he's campaigning on. Trump is saying the American government has become fundamentally corrupt. There is a deep state. It has politicized the justice system. He's saying it rigs elections and it's coming after him politically. And this is why you had Russia Part 1, Indictment Part 1, Indictment Part 2, the witch hunt, as he called it, all these things to go after him. And so to believe his message, you need to believe, one, that the attacks against him were based on politics, not based on legitimate inquiry. I think, frankly, if you've been following the news cycle, you know that the most things they've gone after him on have been debunked. And so his statements are credible on that. But his solution to it is that he wants to go in and basically fire tens of thousands of government officials and government employees. He wants to cleanse the government. He wants to purge the government. And so if you elect Trump, he's promising to go in and fire people by the tens of thousands to get rid of what he says is systemic corruption within the system. Now, for people who support Trump, that's an easy message to accept, I think. But for people who didn't until now, I'd say they would have to believe a lot of things that some of them don't believe in order to accept that. What ironically this DA in New York has done, and by backing this and supporting it, the Democrats have maybe willingly or unwillingly done. Nancy Pelosi, for example, making a statement saying that Trump has to prove his innocence. Well, in America, you're innocent until proven guilty. Trump doesn't have to prove his innocence. The DA needs to prove that he's guilty. It's the other way around. You see what I mean? And so as they do things like this, they're making it look like, frankly, Trump is right. They are validating Trump's fundamental message. And the very otherwise extreme thing he's saying that people might have trouble accepting becomes vivid, present, constant reality. Because what's going to happen now is the entire country and the world are going to be watching this trial. The entire country and the world are going to be focused on Trump. And they're going to be watching whether this is a legitimate trial or not. They're going to be hearing both sides of the argument. They're going to be looking at the information and the evidence come out, and they're going to be able to judge for themselves. Is this politicized or is this legitimate? And even beyond politicized or legitimate, is this justice being served, or is this basically the destruction of our justice system. What you're also going to see is that Trump is going to become a martyr. In other words, Trump is becoming a martyr of the very thing he's warning the nation about. He is saying the justice system has been politicized, there's systemic corruption, and they're going after him for now, but if they get through him, they're coming for you. That's his narrative. He is becoming a martyr of that narrative through these actions, generally speaking. Let me go over a couple more things, then we'll jump into some stories, then we'll jump into questions. Now, one thing that's going to be a reality is that this is a trial in New York City. The grand jury was showing signs that it wasn't sure if they're going to indict Trump. The DA's office, based on some news reports, was having a lot of internal turmoil over this case and the nature of it being politicized. You may remember some of the history of this. DA Bragg, Alvin Bragg, the one who brought this case forward, he had previously tossed the case out. Two prosecutors under him basically went on the warpath. One of them published a book on an ongoing investigation against Trump and even did a media tour, which in and of itself should actually make this fruit of the poisonous tree and get the entire thing thrown out under normal legal terms. The reality is it's going to be nearly impossible for Trump to get a fair trial. Part of that is because of the actions of Bragg's office itself and the former prosecutor who wrote a book and did a media tour on an ongoing investigation. That alone, under normal circumstances, would get the entire thing thrown out, aside from all the legal hurdles I mentioned before. Also, because he is the former president of the United States and someone who, depending on which side of the political aisle you're on, you're going to have preconceived notions about him. It's going to be almost impossible for Trump to get a fair trial, no matter what, whether it's people for him or against him. And for the most part, every American is on one side or the other now. You're not going to find anybody who has not been impacted by some media reports and has not formed preconceived ideas about Trump. They don't exist. Everybody, tell me, do you know anybody who doesn't have an opinion on Trump? You tell me. Everyone has an opinion on him. He's been deeply attacked by the left media and heavily promoted by the right-wing media. It's the nature of it. And so it's going to be hard for him, if not impossible, to get a fair trial. That alone would also make it very difficult to prosecute him under any normal circumstance. And in addition to this, you do have politicians on both sides of the aisle weighing in on this. And whether you're Republican or Democrat, you could call that politicized justice to some extent. It is controversial and complicated given the nature that, well, this is a district attorney elevating a misdemeanor to a federal crime, altering laws, altering precedent, doing things you normally can't do, and frankly, looking like he's on the warpath and going after a former president and the front runner of a political party, the main candidate of the opposition to the sitting president in the upcoming elections. You can expect politicians to get involved because, frankly, you also can't have a rogue DA risking and going and interfering with elections. You can't have a rogue DA get a random urge and just go prosecute whoever he wants. You can't have a rogue DA abusing their power. And so whether you believe that's happening or not, that is what he's being accused of doing. And by nature of that, you could expect there to be political involvement. But that political involvement itself can also poison the jury pool. And that intervention, so to speak, could also get the case thrown out under normal circumstances. So this is very complicated on many fronts, as I've been mentioning. That being said, though, what you're going to watch is going to be a spectacle demonstrating, ironically, you're going to be watching a spectacle of two competing narratives. On one side, the narrative is going to be that Trump is corrupt, Trump paid off Stormy Daniels, Trump used campaign money to do this, and Trump is a criminal and should go to jail. That's going to be one narrative. It's a very weak narrative because of many of the issues I mentioned. The other narrative is going to be that the government is fundamentally corrupt. The government needs to be reformed, and Trump is the guy trying to do it, and he's being attacked for doing it. Now, which of these sides do you think is primary? Which of these sides do you believe is stronger? That is going to be the spectacle we are going to be watching as a nation. And I would argue that the evidence is on the Trump side, just being honest. But again, we'll see how it plays out because the DA's office claims that they now have evidence that nobody's ever seen before. We'll see what they have because they've tried going after Trump on this before and they've never shown any proof of that. I'll show you in a minute. Now, the worst, in my opinion, the worst thing that could happen right now is that a Trump supporter or somebody else does something stupid. I think people are concerned that this is like end of the republic type stuff, that this is the fate of America type stuff. To an extent, you could argue that based on the nature of republics, going back to the Roman Republic, and the way republics fall, which if you go and read, for example, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, could be, again, they do talk about the nature of that as being the politicization of the justice system in terms of what was the first step of the Roman Republic falling. So you could argue that on pretty level terms, to be honest. But I do think that if violence is carried out, if there's domestic turmoil, that kind of chaos, ironically, will probably hurt Trump more than help him, because the spectacle, the case, is going to inevitably, I think, help him in the long run, and ironically validate his campaign message. Now, that said, folks, let's jump over to Epoch TV for the rest of this. I want to show you a few stories. We'll go over what's being said, go over the evidence. Also, if you have questions, we'll go over questions, so you can leave them in the chat. That said, folks, let's jump over to Epoch TV exclusively now, and I will see you there.
The American story was once seen as a light of strength and freedom for the world. It created a government by the people and for the people, where rights were given not by leaders, but by God. Yet now the very fabric of the nation is under assault. What is the real story of America? Why did the Founding Fathers choose a republic over a democracy? And what would the world be if the bedrock of the American Constitution was lost?
All right, folks, thank you for being here. Let's go further into this. Again, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll get to them in a minute. But I want to go over the case. Let me show you, first of all, Epoch Times reporting on this. We have a story here. It says, court officially confirms details for first hearing in Trump